Imagine standing on the roof of a skyscraper during a hurricane. Now, imagine that skyscraper is moving at 35 miles per hour. Now, imagine someone is throwing bombs at you while you try to land a jet plane on the roof. This is the daily reality of the flight deck aboard the USS George H.W. Bush. It is the last of its kind, the final ship of the legendary Nimitz class, a nuclear-powered Leviathan named after the only president who was also a naval aviator. To the enemy, it is 100,000 tons of terrifying diplomacy. But to the 5,000 souls trapped inside its steel walls, it is simply the Avenger. If you look at this ship from a satellite, you see a weapon. But if you zoom in past the F-18 Super Hornets, past the radar arrays, and down through 4 inches of armored steel, you find something else entirely. You find a city that never sleeps, a city that has no windows, a city where the currency isn't money but sleep, Wi-Fi, and hot sauce. This is the hidden world of CVN-77. It is a place where teenagers operate nuclear reactors and where the difference between a good day and a bad day often comes down to one simple question. Is there pizza in the galley tonight? To understand how this massive machine functions, you have to ignore the missiles for a moment and look at the menu. Because the most dangerous enemy on an aircraft carrier isn't a submarine or a drone, it is hunger. If the crew doesn't eat, the planes don't fly. If the planes don't fly, the mission fails. Napoleon once said an army marches on its stomach. Well, a carrier floats on it. The logistical challenge of feeding 5,000 people in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean is staggering. It is an industrial operation that rivals the biggest factories on land. Every single day, the 7 galleys aboard the Bush prepare more than 18,000 meals. The grocery list for a single day reads like a math problem gone wrong. 12,000 eggs, 800 gallons of milk, 2,000 pounds of chicken, 1,000 pounds of hamburger meat, and 600 pounds of vegetables. But cooking on land is easy. The floor stays still. Here, the kitchen is a combat zone. The temperature in the main galley can easily reach 110 degrees. The air is thick with steam, grease, and the smell of 5,000 people waiting for lunch. And then the ship turns. When the captain orders a high-speed maneuver to launch aircraft, the entire ship lists to the side. In the galley, this is chaos. Imagine trying to bake 500 cakes when gravity suddenly shifts 15 degrees. Deep fryers full of boiling oil become deadly weapons. Heavy steel pots slide across counters. The culinary specialists, the unsung heroes of the ship, have to adopt a C stance, feet wide, knees bent, surfing the floor while flipping burgers. The food itself is a constant topic of conversation. It is the primary morale driver on the ship. When the supply ship has just visited, life is good. You have fresh lettuce. You have real bananas. You have milk that pours out of a jug. But 2 weeks later, the fresh food runs out. The bananas turn black and disappear. The lettuce vanishes. The milk is replaced by UHT milk, ultra-high temperature pasteurized milk that comes in a box and can sit on a shelf for 6 months. It tastes slightly burnt, slightly chalky, and absolutely nothing like home. This is when the culinary team has to get creative. They start using the breaking stores, the frozen and canned goods deep in the hull. The eggs become powdered eggs, a yellow dust rehydrated with water. The vegetables come from cans. The culinary specialists use spices and hot sauce to mask the taste of preservatives. There is a rhythm to the menu that every sailor memorizes. It's a 21-day cycle. If you walk into the mess deck and see chili mac, you know it's Wednesday. If you see fish squares, it's Friday. If you see steak and lobster, you get worried. In the civilian world, steak and lobster is a luxury. On an aircraft carrier, it is usually an apology. It's called surf and turf, and it often appears right before the captain announces that the deployment has been extended or that the ship is heading into a combat zone. Sailors call it bad news beef. It tastes delicious, but it feels like a bribe. But the most important meal on the ship isn't dinner. It is midrats, midnight rations. The ship operates on an 18-hour day. The night check, the vampires who maintain the jets and watch the radars while the world sleeps need fuel. From 11:00 p.m. to 1:00 a.m., the galley serves the greasiest, heaviest, most comforting food imaginable: corn dogs, breakfast burritos, tater tots, pizza pockets. It isn't healthy, it isn't gourmet. But when you have just spent 12 hours on a pitch-black flight deck, cold and exhausted, a warm corn dog tastes like a Michelin star meal. It is comfort food in the truest sense of the word. But where does all this food come from? There are no grocery stores in the middle of the ocean. This brings us to the most terrifying grocery run on Earth, the UNREP, underway replenishment. Every 10 to 14 days, a massive supply ship pulls up alongside the George H.W. Bush. They steam side by side, separated by just 150 feet of rushing water moving at 15 knots. If the helmsman makes a mistake, the ships collide. Helicopters buzz overhead, dropping pallets of supplies onto the flight deck. Forklifts race around, grabbing the cargo before the next load drops. It is a dangerous ballet of steel and rotor wash. This is an all-hands evolution. Pilots, computer technicians, mechanics, everyone becomes a mover. They form human chains stretching down from the flight deck through the hangar bay and deep into the storerooms. They pass boxes of frozen chicken, flour, and coffee hand over hand for hours. It is back-breaking work. But no one complains too much because they know that inside those boxes is the mail. Care packages, Amazon boxes, letters from home. For a few hours, the ship feels connected to the world again. Sailors tear open boxes to find favorite snacks, photos, and hygiene products that smell like something other than industrial soap. Once the food is eaten, the waste must be managed. 5,000 people create a mountain of trash every day. You can't just throw it overboard. The Bush has a massive waste processing center. Plastic is melted down into solid discs, giant hockey pucks of compressed garbage that are stored on board until the ship hits port. Metal is crushed. Food waste is pulped into a slurry and discharged only in specific international zones. It is a hidden, dirty, necessary job. But life on the Bush isn't just about eating. It is about living in a space that was not designed for humans. Let's talk about the rack. Your bed, your home, your coffin. Enlisted sailors sleep in berthing compartments that hold 60 to 100 people. The beds are stacked 3 high. They are aluminum pans 6 feet long and 28 inches wide. If you are on the top rack, you are sleeping inches away from pipes, wires, and valves. If you are in the middle, you are sandwiched between 2 other human beings. You cannot sit up. You cannot roll over quickly. You have a small blue curtain that separates you from the room. That curtain is the only privacy you have. Behind it, you can read, you can sleep, you can cry. Outside of it, you are property of the U.S. Navy. The smell of the berthing compartment is unique. It is a cocktail of JP5 jet fuel, floor wax, stale sweat, and boot polish. After a month at sea, you don't even smell it anymore. It just smells like home. Waking up is a shock. There is no sunlight. You rely on alarms. You slide out of your rack, careful not to step on your shipmate's face. You grab your shower shoes. You never ever touch the deck with bare feet. Fungal infections are a real threat. The bathrooms, called heads, are industrial. Stainless steel toilets with no dividers, showers that are barely wider than your shoulders. Water is precious. The ship makes its own water, 400,000 gallons a day by boiling seawater with nuclear power. But the jets need water for the catapults. The laundry needs water. You are last on the list, so you take a Navy shower. Water on to get wet, water off, soap up, water on to rinse. Done, 3 minutes. If you take longer, someone will pound on the door because 10 other guys are waiting, and they are late for watch. This lack of privacy and space creates a unique social pressure. You are never alone. Ever, you eat with people, you work with people, you sleep with people, you shower next to people. It forces a bond that is stronger than friendship. These people become your brothers and sisters because they have to be. You see them at their best and their worst. You see them when they get the Dear John email from a girlfriend back home. You see them when they are sick. You see them when they are terrified. And make no mistake, fear is part of the job. The roof of this city is the most dangerous place on the planet. The flight deck, 4.5 acres of non-skid steel. During flight operations, it is a chaotic orchestra of violence. Jet engines scream at 140 decibels, loud enough to rupture your eardrums instantly without protection. Propellers on the E-2 Hawkeyes spin invisibly, capable of slicing a human in half. Jet intakes act like massive vacuum cleaners that can suck a person in. And the jet blast from an F-18 in afterburner can blow a sailor overboard into the dark ocean. The crew on deck wears color-coded jerseys to bring order to the chaos. Purple shirts fuel the jets, red shirts handle the bombs and missiles, green shirts maintain the catapults, yellow shirts direct the traffic. They communicate with hand signals, a thumbs up, a fist, a point. Trust is absolute. If a yellow shirt signals you to stop, you freeze. If you take one more step, you might walk into a propeller. The pilots are the rock stars of the ship, but they are helpless without the crew. Before a pilot even climbs into the cockpit, a 19-year-old kid has checked the engine. Another kid has loaded the missiles. Another has fueled the tanks. Another has calculated the catapult pressure. When that jet launches, going from 0 to 165 miles per hour in 2 seconds, it is the culmination of thousands of hours of work. But for the crew below decks, the launch is just a sound, thump, whoosh. If you sleep under the flight deck, it sounds like giants are bowling on the roof. Day and night lose their meaning. The ship operates on a schedule that ignores the sun. Flight ops can last for 12, 14, 16 hours. The only way to tell time is by the meal being served in the galley. Is it eggs? It must be morning. Is it burgers? It must be lunch. Is it leftovers? It must be midnight. There are moments, however, when the machine stops. Every once in a long while, the captain authorizes a steel beach picnic. The flight deck is shut down, the jets are towed to the bow, grills are brought up. The cooks, who usually toil in the windowless dungeons below, come up to the sunlight. They grill thousands of burgers and hot dogs. Sailors put on shorts. They play football on the landing strip. They sit on the edge of the ship, legs dangling over a 60-foot drop to the blue water, eating a burger and watching the sun set. For a few hours, the rank disappears. The stress evaporates. They are just young men and women having a barbecue on the roof of the world. It is a necessary reset. Without these moments, the psychological pressure would break them. The isolation is the hardest part. River City. It sounds nice, but it is a code for a communications blackout. When the ship is on a sensitive mission, or if there is an accident, the internet is cut. No emails, no Facebook, no calls, silence. You are cut off from your family. You don't know why. You just have to trust and keep working. When the internet comes back, the line for the computers stretches down the hall. Sailors wait for hours just to send a good morning message to a spouse who is sleeping 5,000 miles away. There is also the blue tile mystery. The ship is vast. It is a labyrinth. New sailors get lost for weeks. There are rumors of compartments that haven't been opened in years. There are skate spots, hidden corners behind ventilation ducts where a sailor can hide and take a nap on a pile of rags. It is a game of cat and mouse between the exhausted crew and the chiefs who are trying to find them. But despite the exhaustion, despite the bad food, despite the cramped bunks, there is a pride here. The USS George H.W. Bush is the bridge between the old Navy and the new. It has the soul of the Nimitz class, gritty, mechanical, proven. It is a ship where you can fix things with a wrench and a hammer. The crew knows that they are the tip of the spear. When a crisis breaks out in the Middle East or Europe, the first question the president asks is, where are the carriers? And usually the answer is, the Bush is already there. The deployment is a marathon, 6 months, 7 months, 9 months. Channel fever sets in towards the end. It is a nervous energy. The ship starts to get cleaner. Sailors start packing their bags weeks in advance. The anticipation of seeing land, of seeing family, of eating a pizza that wasn't frozen 6 months ago becomes overwhelming. When the ship finally pulls into its home port in Norfolk, Virginia, the scene is emotional. Thousands of families line the pier. Signs, flags, babies who have been born while their fathers were at sea. The tugboats guide the massive beast into its berth. The brow is lowered, and the first sailors step off, their legs shaky on the solid ground. They smell the grass. They smell the rain. They smell the absence of jet fuel. They have lived in a city of steel. They have survived on powdered eggs and courage. They have kept the watch while the world slept. And as they drive away from the pier, leaving the massive gray hull behind in the rearview mirror, they know one thing for sure. They will never look at a cheeseburger, a hot shower, or a queen-sized bed the same way again. Because once you have lived in the belly of the Avenger, you realize that the comforts of home are not rights. They are luxuries. And they are luxuries that are paid for by the sweat, the hunger, and the sacrifice of the 5,000 souls aboard the USS George H.W. Bush.